Look inside your closet or your browser history. You have a graveyard of abandoned hobbies. The guitar you played obsessively for a month, the language app you dominated until you hit conversational level. You finally sit down on the couch, but your chest gets tight with guilt. You think you are uniquely flaky. Society calls you lazy. But neuroscience calls it a reward prediction error collapse. You are not broken, you are wired to chase puzzles, not maintenance. Over the next half hour, I will show you what happens in your brain at the 80% mark, why your dopamine plummets, and why this supposed flaw is actually your greatest hidden intellectual advantage. We need to talk about the shame of the perfectionist's graveyard. You know exactly what I am talking about. It is that heavy feeling you get when a friend asks how that painting class is going. You mumble an excuse about being too busy, but the truth is, you just stopped caring. The fire went out overnight. One day you were staying up until 3 in the morning watching tutorials, and the next day, looking at your supplies felt like a physical chore. You have done this with fitness routines, side hustles, and creative projects. And every time it happens, a little voice in your head tells you that you lack discipline. The world tells you to push through. The world is wrong. That voice tells you that successful people commit to one path. It tells you that because you cannot stick to a single thing, you will never master anything. You look at specialists, people who have done the same job for 20 years, and you wonder what is missing in your brain. Why can you not just be satisfied with routine? Why do you constantly need to hit the reset button on your life? You start to believe that you are afraid of commitment, or worse, that you are just playing at life. But I want you to erase that narrative from your mind right now. The world calls this behavior a character defect, but science calls it a highly adapted search for optimal arousal. Before we break down the biology of why you quit, I want to invite you to join the tribe of people who think exactly like this. Hit subscribe if you are tired of neurotypical advice that does not work for your brain. We do not do standard self-help here. We use clinical psychology and neuroscience to understand why you operate the way you do. Because once you understand the machinery inside your head, you stop fighting it. You stop trying to force yourself into a mold built for the average mind. You are built for depth and velocity. And today, we are going to dismantle the guilt you feel about your abandoned projects by looking at the first 3 weeks of any new obsession. Let us start with the honeymoon phase. Think back to the last time you discovered a brand new interest. For the first 3 weeks, it is all you can think about. You are in a state of absolute hyper-focus. You buy the gear, you learn the terminology, you join the online forums. You feel alive in a way that your daily routine never provides. Online ADHD communities constantly talk about this specific 3-week window. They call it hyperfixation. But what is actually happening under the hood? Why does a brand new spreadsheet or a new coding language suddenly feel like the most thrilling thing in the world? The answer lies in a deep misunderstanding of a chemical called dopamine. Pop psychology has lied to you about dopamine. The internet calls it the pleasure chemical. They tell you that you get a hit of dopamine when you eat a donut or get a like on social media, and that your brain is just chasing cheap thrills. But clinical psychiatrists and neurologists know that this is fundamentally incorrect. Dopamine is not about pleasure. It is a teaching and motivation signal. It is the chemical of pursuit. According to research published by the Seattle Anxiety Clinic, dopamine is released in response to novel stimuli and violated expectations. It is your brain's way of marking a new environment as important. It tells your nervous system to wake up and pay attention. When you encounter something entirely new, your brain is forced out of autopilot. It cannot predict what is going to happen next. This unpredictability triggers a massive release of dopamine. This release serves a very specific evolutionary purpose. It encourages you to explore, to test boundaries, and to learn the rules of this new puzzle. The dopamine does not make you feel good just for the sake of feeling good. It makes you feel energized so that you have the stamina to figure out the mystery. Your brain gets its biggest reward not from finishing a task, but from figuring things out. As long as the environment remains a mystery, the dopamine keeps flowing freely. A psychiatry review on novelty explains the exact mechanism. When a new stimulus is encountered, a region of your brain called the hippocampus is highly activated. The hippocampus is the center of learning and memory. When it detects a completely novel situation, it signals the release of dopamine. This chemical wash facilitates something called long-term potentiation. That is, a fancy neurological term for wiring new neural pathways quickly. Your brain is literally upgrading its hardware in real time to adapt to this new hobby. That feeling of being totally absorbed, that rush of clarity when you learn a new chord on the guitar or a new piece of software, that is long-term potentiation in action. To understand why you eventually quit, you must first understand a concept called prediction error. Research from the National Institutes of Health highlights that humans are essentially prediction machines. We constantly compare incoming information from our environment with our existing knowledge to guess what will happen next. When you are a beginner at a new hobby, your internal model of the world is completely wrong. You try to knit a stitch, and it looks terrible. You try to bake sourdough, and it comes out like a brick. Every time you make a mistake, your brain registers a prediction error. And paradoxically, these errors are exactly what keep you completely hooked on the process. Prediction errors drive stronger neural encoding. When your expectation is violated, the brain floods your system with dopamine to ensure you remember the correction. Oh, so that is how that tool works. Ah, I see why that code failed. Each of these tiny revelations is a massive dopamine spike. Psychology Today summarizes this bluntly. Novelty activates the brain in incredibly powerful ways. It makes us feel intensely alive. In the beginner phase of any project, everything is novel. The tools are new. The terminology is a foreign language. The mistakes are frequent. The small wins are thrilling. Your prediction errors are sky high, which means the learning curve is practically vertical. This combination of high novelty and rapid learning generates an intoxicating sense of momentum. It feels so good that your conscious mind starts telling you lies. You tell yourself, "This is it. This is the thing I have been looking for my whole life. I am going to become a professional woodworker. I am going to master this language and move to Spain." You mistake the chemical rush of rapid learning for a lifelong passion. But the rush was never about the woodworking or the language. The rush was about the density of prediction errors. Your brain was just thrilled to have a complex puzzle to solve. And this brings us to the most dangerous phase of the cycle, the 80% mark. But wait, if dopamine is primarily a teaching signal triggered by mistakes and surprises, what happens the exact moment your brain finally figures out the pattern? This is where the 80% cliff destroys your motivation. You are not quitting because it gets too hard. You are quitting because it becomes too predictable. Once you have learned enough that the basic structure of the hobby is clear to you, your prediction errors drop off a cliff. Your brain is now mostly predicting outcomes correctly. You know how the camera works. You know the basic conversational phrases. The mystery has been solved. And because the mystery is solved, the dopaminergic teaching signal shuts down entirely. While pop science does not formally call it the 80% cliff, the underlying mechanism is a foundational law of neuroscience. A study in Science Direct explains that dopamine neurons code specifically for reward prediction error. They fire intensely when outcomes are better or different than expected. but crucially, they reduce their firing when outcomes become fully predicted. As you get better at a task, as your proficiency moves from 20% to 60% and then up toward 80%, the error term in your brain mathematically approaches zero. Your brain says, I know how to do this now. I no longer need to spend metabolic energy learning this pattern. Shut off the juice. This creates a brutal paradox. Just as your objective performance becomes legitimately good, your subjective experience of the activity goes completely flat. You are finally producing good work, but you feel absolutely nothing. The dopamine curve has flattened out. Without that chemical wind at your back, engaging in the hobby suddenly requires raw willpower. You sit down to practice, and instead of excitement, you feel a creeping sense of restlessness. Your eyes start wandering to other tabs, other projects, other entirely unrelated fields. You interpret this as a moral failing. You think you are losing your drive. But you are simply experiencing the natural biological consequence of competence. Boredom is not a sign of laziness. Boredom is an active biological signal. Boredom research notes that repeated, unvarying stimulation leads to decreased engagement and motivation. When environments or tasks lack novelty, people show dramatically less effort and more disengagement. Your brain uses boredom like a physical pain receptor. It is a warning light on the dashboard that says, "We are no longer learning here. Please move us to a new environment with higher uncertainty." At low skill, you had high uncertainty, many surprises, and high dopamine. At competence, you have highly predictable outcomes, no surprise, and therefore zero motivation. You have literally outgrown the chemical reward. This is why online productivity and neurodivergent communities spontaneously rediscover this pattern over and over again. People on Reddit forums notice that they are fiercely drawn to novelty. They describe having a much higher requirement for prediction errors than the average person. They note that their interest vanishes into thin air the absolute second they grasp a new skill or see the path to the end of a project. They say their dopamine dives off a cliff. This is heavily anecdotal, but it neatly and perfectly mirrors the formal clinical theory of sensory gating and dopamine sensitivity. You are wired to map the unknown, and the moment a territory is mapped, your brain demands a new frontier. But there is a darker reason some of you abandon ship. It is not just about a biological drop in dopamine. Stopping at 80% proficiency is often a highly sophisticated defense mechanism. When you hit that stage, the easy, rapid gains are completely gone. Going from 0 to 60% proficiency is incredibly fast. Going from 80 to 99% proficiency requires slow, agonizing, deliberate practice. It requires doing the same repetitive motions over and over again without any massive leaps in skill. And more importantly, it requires you to tolerate imperfection in public. And if you are a perfectionist, this stage represents an absolute psychological nightmare. Clinical literature on perfectionism and procrastination, such as papers from ELD psychology, states that perfectionists set unrelenting, entirely unrealistic standards for themselves. They fear mistakes on a primal level and become their own harshest, most vicious critics. During the first 3 weeks of a hobby, you gave yourself permission to be bad because you were a beginner. The label of beginner protected your ego. But once you reach 80%, you are no longer a beginner. You are intermediate. And suddenly, your own toxic standards kick in. You look at the gap between your current ability and absolute mastery, and that gap feels like an insurmountable, humiliating mountain. Therapists at the Path to Peace Therapy note a fascinating link between perfectionism and quitting. When initial rapid growth naturally slows down into a normal learning plateau, Perfectionists misinterpret this biological reality as absolute failure. You think, I am no longer skyrocketing in skill, therefore I must not be talented at this after all. Instead of seeing the plateau as the normal, required phase of consolidation, where the brain locks in the new skills, you view it as proof of your inadequacy. This leads to deep discouragement and immediate behavioural avoidance. You stop picking up the guitar. You stop opening the software. You avoid the task to escape the pain of the plateau. This is called fear-based perfectionism, and it is strongly tied to chronic procrastination and project abandonment. According to research by Dr. Judd on habit loops, when individuals feel they cannot meet their own flawlessly high standards, they delay or avoid tasks entirely. They do this to escape the severe anxiety of producing a less than perfect outcome. So at around 70 to 80% proficiency, you hit a catastrophic double bind. First, the dopamine from easy, novel gains has completely faded. Second, the remaining gains require slow maintenance and public vulnerability. Your threat detection system lights up like a Christmas tree. Your brain calculates that continuing is a massive risk to your ego. Quitting at 80% protects your self-image. It is a brilliant, albeit self-sabotaging, psychological trick. If you quit while you are still pretty good for a beginner, you get to keep the internal narrative that says, I am potentially great at this. I just got bored. You get to maintain the identity of the hidden genius, the untapped prodigy. If you actually pushed through to 100%, you would have to face your actual limitations. You would have to risk finding out that your best effort might only be slightly above average. Quitting allows you to keep the fantasy of unlimited potential safe from the harsh, undeniable evidence of reality. You quit to protect your pride. The world wants you to fix this. Society tells you to pick a lane, grind it out, and become a specialist. But I'm going to tell you to completely reframe how you look at your past. What looks like a graveyard of abandoned hobbies to a specialist is, through another lens, the ultimate resume of a generalist. Writers and researchers who study multipotentialites, people with many serious intersecting interests, highlight several critical superpowers that match your behavioural pattern perfectly. You are not a master of none. You are a master of learning how to learn. And in a rapidly changing world, that is a far more robust survival mechanism than being highly specialised in just one brittle skill. The first major superpower is rapid skill acquisition. According to resources like Putty-like, multipotentialites are so accustomed to diving into brand new disciplines that they become uniquely skilled at the actual meta process of learning. Because you have forced your brain into the beginner phase 50 different times, your nervous system is highly optimized for navigating confusion. You do not panic when you do not understand a framework, because you have been there constantly. The more experience you have being a complete novice, the faster getting good actually becomes. Your dopamine sensitivity to novelty is exactly what fuels this passionate, high-speed assimilation of complex information. The second superpower is the accumulation of transferable skills. Educational research featured in Faculty Focus explains that generalists rarely start from scratch. When a specialist learns a new skill, they view it in isolation. When you learn a new skill, you bring the cognitive frameworks of 50 other disciplines with you. Skills transfer seamlessly across domains. You bring everything you learned about the precision of coding to the structural pacing of writing music. You bring the visual balance you learned in photography to the layout of a business presentation. Every time you abandon a hobby at 80%, you are actually extracting its core mental models and adding them to your master toolkit. The third and most valuable superpower is idea synthesis. Author Erin Thompson points out that generalists excel at combining disparate ideas from completely unrelated fields. They create something entirely new at the intersection of those fields. Specialists wear blinders. They know everything about their specific silo, but they lack peripheral vision. Because your brain demands high prediction errors, you are constantly roaming across the boundaries of different industries. You see possibilities and structural connections that experts completely miss. You can look at a logistics problem and solve it using a principle you learned while hyper-focusing on urban gardening 3 years ago. That is synthesis. Patylike's formal list of multipotentialite advantages explicitly includes this adaptability. You draw from multiple domains to generate highly creative solutions, and you are intensely comfortable operating outside of your comfort zone. Think about your 50 abandoned hobbies. Map them out on a piece of paper. You have built a remarkably broad library of techniques. When a catastrophic new problem appears at work or in life, the specialists panic because the problem does not fit their single mental model. But you simply open your massive archive of 80% skills. You pull a concept from design, a workflow from fitness, and a communication style from a language app, and you build a bridge over the chaos. The very same novelty-seeking mechanism that makes you start 100 different projects is exactly what equips you to be unusually brilliant at cross-domain thinking. The graveyard in your closet is not evidence that you cannot commit. It is hard, physical evidence that your biological comparative advantage is breadth and fast learning, not long-term monotony. Society is built on an industrial-era model that values the factory worker doing one task perfectly for 40 years. But we no longer live in an industrial economy. We live in an information economy that violently rewards adaptability, pattern recognition, and the ability to pivot rapidly when the rules of the game change overnight. So how do you actually live with this? How do you function when the world demands specialists, but your brain demands novelty? The first step is absolute, radical acceptance. Stop fighting your neurological wiring. Stop trying to shame yourself into pushing past the 80% cliff if the skill does not actually require mastery. If you only need to be conversational in a language for a 2-week trip, let 80% be enough. If you learned enough coding to automate a single annoying task at your job, you won. You do not need to become a senior software engineer just because you bought a Python book. Extract the value, log the mental model into your brain, and confidently walk away without guilt. The second step is to actively design your life and your career for continuous prediction errors. If you know that your dopamine system crashes when environments become predictable, you must intentionally introduce unpredictability into your work. Do not take jobs that require maintaining a static system. Take roles that require building, troubleshooting, or launching new initiatives. Become a consultant, a project manager, or a creative director. Position yourself at the beginning of the pipeline where the chaos is high, the rules are unwritten, and the dopamine is abundant. Let the specialists handle the maintenance phase. Your job is to drop into the jungle, map the territory, and move to the next frontier. And finally, we must address the perfectionist fear that forces you to abandon things you actually do want to master. For the few core skills that truly matter to you, the ones you genuinely want to push to 100%, you have to change your relationship with the learning plateau. When you hit the 80% cliff and the dopamine vanishes, you must stop interpreting the subsequent boredom as a failure. Remind your nervous system, the mystery is solved. The chemical rush is over. Now, the real architecture begins. Expect the boredom. Welcome it as proof that you have conquered the beginner phase. Lower your unrealistic standards and allow yourself to be publicly, visibly imperfect while you grind out the final miles. You are not broken. You are not lazy. You are not a dilettante. You have a highly sensitive novelty detection system that prioritizes learning over stagnation. You are a synthesizer of ideas in a world that desperately needs people who can see the big picture. The next time you look at that dusty guitar or that half-finished painting, I do not want you to feel a single ounce of shame. I want you to look at it and say, "That was a beautiful puzzle. I solved the part I needed to solve, and I am taking the lessons with me." Your graveyard of hobbies is actually the foundation of your genius. You are built for depth across a massive spectrum. Embrace the breadth. Embrace the pivot. If this clinical breakdown helped you finally make sense of your own behavior, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We are building a community of individuals who use psychology and science to discover more about their unique wiring rather than trying to fix things that were never broken to begin with. Share this video with that friend who constantly bounces from passion to passion. Tell them they are not uniquely flaky. Tell them they are a generalist. Keep exploring, keep collecting your 80% skills, and I will see you in the next analysis. You are doing just fine. Let us look even closer at the cellular level of this phenomenon. It is not just that dopamine release slows down. Your actual receptors adapt to the stimulation. During the first few weeks of a new project, your D2 dopamine receptors are highly sensitive to the novelty. But neuroplasticity is a double-edged sword. As you engage with the hobby day after day, your brain engages in a process called receptor downregulation. It essentially turns down the volume on the dopamine signal to protect the brain from overstimulation. The activity that felt like a jolt of electricity on day 1 barely registers a spark by day 30. Your biology is actively fighting against prolonged infatuation with a single, solved stimulus. This connects to a neurological function known as sensory gating. Sensory gating is your brain's ability to filter out redundant or unnecessary stimuli from your environment. When you first start knitting, every movement of the needle requires conscious, ungated attention. It is critical information. But at 80% proficiency, your brain moves the physical act of knitting into your basal ganglia, the brain center for automated habits. Once it is an automated habit, sensory gating kicks in. The brain filters out the experience, deciding it no longer requires active, conscious processing. You literally become numb to the activity. You cannot feel the magic anymore because your brain has aggressively muted the channel. Historically, this trait was highly prized. In the Renaissance, the ideal intellectual was a polymath, someone whose expertise spanned a significant number of different subject areas. Leonardo da Vinci famously abandoned dozens of projects, leaving paintings unfinished because he became obsessed with anatomy, and then leaving anatomy behind to study fluid dynamics. His brain was chasing the exact same reward prediction errors that yours is. He did not view his unfinished paintings as a lack of discipline. He simply followed the steepest learning curves available to him. The modern world pathologizes this, but historically, the ability to rapidly assimilate diverse fields was the hallmark of genius. Let us revisit the perfectionism aspect, specifically how the amygdala gets involved. The amygdala is your brain's threat detection center. When you reach the 80% plateau and realize that the next 20% will expose your flaws, your amygdala actually registers this as a social survival threat. In human evolutionary history, looking incompetent in front of the tribe meant exclusion and death. So when your unrelenting standards clash with the slow grind of mastery, your brain triggers a low-grade fight or flight response. You feel a sudden, intense aversion to the hobby. You are not just bored, your nervous system is actively pulling you away from the activity to save you from perceived social death. Dr. Judd's research on procrastination breaks this down perfectly. Procrastination is not a time management issue. It is an emotion regulation issue. The habit loop works like this. The trigger is the unfinished project demanding perfection. The emotion is severe anxiety. The behaviour is avoiding the project and starting a brand new, low-stakes hobby. And the reward is the immediate relief from anxiety, plus a fresh hit of novelty dopamine. You have accidentally trained your brain to use quitting as a stress relief valve. Every time you feel the pressure of the 80% plateau, you medicate that stress by buying a new domain name or starting a new course. You are self-medicating with early-stage learning curves. But remember the upside. By constantly resetting the loop, you are accumulating a vast matrix of mental models. Author James Altucher calls this idea sex. It is the concept that the best ideas do not come from deep within one isolated field, but from the intersection of two completely unrelated fields mating and producing a novel concept. If you are in the top 20% of 3 different fields, you are vastly more valuable than someone in the top 1% of a single field. Your scattered hobbies have secretly made you a top-tier synthesizer. The coding logic you learned for 3 weeks deeply influences how you structure arguments in your writing. Nothing is ever truly wasted in the generalist's brain. Part of the guilt you feel comes from the modern pressure to monetize everything. Hustle culture dictates that if you are good at baking sourdough, you must start a bakery. If you are good at making videos, you must become a full-time creator. So when you abandon a hobby, you feel like you are abandoning a potential revenue stream or failing as an entrepreneur. But hobbies are supposed to be neurological playgrounds. They are supposed to be the low-stakes environments where your brain can freely chase prediction errors without the threat of financial ruin. When you force a multipotentialite brain to monetize a new interest, you immediately turn a playground into a prison, accelerating the 80% quit. To break the cycle of shame, you must practice aggressive cognitive reframing. The next time you feel the urge to pack up your supplies and move on, pause and audit your biology. Say out loud, "I am not quitting because I am weak. I am moving on because the prediction errors have normalized and the teaching signal is complete." Give yourself a graduation ceremony instead of a funeral. Acknowledge that you extracted the core lesson from that particular puzzle. By intentionally closing the chapter, you remove the heavy psychological baggage of the unfinished project. The closet is no longer a graveyard of failures, it is an archive of completed beginner phases. It is the physical manifestation of your intellectual curiosity. The power of the pivot is your ultimate advantage. When the economy shifts, when artificial intelligence rewrites the rules of the workforce, the rigid specialists will be the ones who shatter. They have only one mental model, and when it becomes obsolete, they have nothing to fall back on. But you? You have spent your entire life training for ambiguity. You know exactly how to walk into a room where you know absolutely nothing, aggressively synthesize the rules, and reach 80% proficiency faster than anyone else. Your brain is a supreme adaptation engine. Do not let anyone shame you for how fast your engine runs. Keep seeking the unknown, keep violating your expectations, and never apologize for the pivot.